Welcome to City and State TV. I'm Executive Editor Michael Johnson, and I'm joined today by political and media consultant Michael Oliva, and also by Harrison Barrero, our editor-at-large. It's shaping up to be a pretty boring election year for most people, but there is some excitement going on in northern Manhattan and into the Bronx, where the congressional district of Charles Rangel is at play next year, and the fight over district leaders has been an intense one, and we've seen a lot of contested races there between the preferred candidates of the candidates who we're going to see next year running for Congress. So we wanted to come and bring everyone together and talk a little bit about why this matters and who some of these people are. Before we talk about the actual district leader races, though, I want to talk about the candidates, and I think that the obvious ones are Keith Wright, Adam Clayton Powell, Adriana Espaillat, Bill Perkins, and then also Susan Johnson Cook is an outsider that, Michael, you mentioned about. Tell us a little bit about her first off.
Well, I mean, she's a very interesting candidate. I mean, what you have are two establishment Harlem candidates, and one of the reasons that these district leader races are so important to them, and we'll get to the specifics later, is because she's sort of the archetypal outsider candidate. She's the only woman in the race. She's the only person with Washington experience. What either Keith Wright or Bill Perkins are going to want to do is they're going to want to establish themselves as the primary vote getter, the guy who can get out the base, the guy who gets the high propensity voters. So if you look at the race in the 70th AD, which we'll talk about, the district leader race, it's very important because Susan Johnson Cook now comes in. She worked for the Clintons. She worked for Obama. She comes in as the sort of above the radar media-driven campaign with a lot of women's groups behind her. So one of those guys wants to say, well, I'm the Harlem guy. I'm the guy who comes in with a base vote that I don't even have to work for, and the rest of it's a battle between us. I can only gain votes instead of just having to create new votes and coming in from out of nowhere.
And to that point, I mean, I think that you look at these district leader races, and I think that people who don't pay close attention to what's going on might think, like, how many votes does a district leader really get? Like, if you are elected district leader by 25, 30 votes over the next person, is that district pretty much split? But they can have a pretty big impact, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's it's a smaller proportion of the vote, but what you're really gauging is where the heart of the district is. The people who are going, the people who work the polls, the people who are going to hand out flyers, they're going to stand in the rain at subway stops. Those are the voters in these races. These are the people who actually like politics. They're sort of the nerdy political people. So they're the people who, when a race like this can be a gauge of where their collective psychology is headed.
But it's also, Michael, I think that we need to explain that some people that view us actually know it, but I don't think there's enough said that within this archaic system we have in New York State, this is a key, to have district leaders in positions that are owned or a subsidiary or doing the bidding of the actual person in that district. The assembly member is key. People who are tied to the city council. So you'll have a district in which the actual elected official, whether he or she is an assembly member or actually a city council member, or it could even be a Congress member, there's very few of those, that actually will run for district leader, because the person can lose an actual race as an assembly member or as state legislator in any capacity, or a city council member, but they can remain as district leader. What the district leader does, and it's very, very telling, and correct me if I'm wrong, and in the power they hold for making the county. So for example, in Manhattan County that we're speaking of, Keith Wright, who's the actual chairman right now, needs as many district leaders on his side that he controls. It happens throughout all the district that he controls, and that he can count on to get things done. The executive committee has decided who's on. I mean, they have a lot of power that is unbeknown to the general population, and they say, district leader, who's that? It's supposed to be a male or female, which is another thing. Gender-wise, it's very balanced, but it's very telling who it is that runs for these things, and they do have a lot of power, more so than people realize, beyond what you already said.
I mean, that's absolutely correct, and another element that we should talk about is the fact that if you look at what happened in the 43rd Assembly District in Brooklyn with the special election, where the Democrats weren't able to field a candidate because they didn't have a proper county committee. This technical minutia stuff matters for parties.
Yeah.
And sure, there's a motion right now and there are warring factions, but if you sort of look at it from a forest instead of a trees perspective, this is very good for the Democratic Party. To walk into, I got to peek into Robert Jackson's club. I went to one of their meetings, into the Yasmin Cornelius William Allen Club, which is the Uptown Democrats. To see 40, 50, 60 people at a club in Harlem in an off year is a great thing. So, I mean, on another level, this builds the necessary apparatus for these parties to exist. When you start heading into the territory that Brooklyn did, it's very dangerous because you need a structure for the party to actually exist into the future.
Definitely. And I think also, too, when you look at, as you said, looking at the forest, the trees kind of concept, there's people who probably are still trying to, close with a lot of these candidates, trying to figure out who they're going to support to some sense, whether they're going to be with Keith Wright or whether they're going to be with Bill Perkins. They're going to maybe wait and see how this turns out to see who has the power and the upper hand before they make the decision of who they're going to support and who they're going to back going forward. Based on these district leader races. Let's start talking about the races specifically. And I know you mentioned the 70th Assembly District, where you have, I'll let you name the candidates. It's Cordell Clear, Yasmin Cornelius, and then an outsider, Afu Ata Mensa, correct?
Correct. The two major candidates are Yasmin Cornelius and Cordell Clare. Cordell Clare is a Bill Perkins person. She was his district leader for many years. What happened is, unfortunately, Teresa Freeman, who was the district leader, had passed away. So it left a vacancy open. Yasmin became the incumbent by a vote of the district leaders, by the party, and so and she's backed by Keith Wright. Cordell Clare has the advantage of the fact that she was drawn out of the district, so she's sort of a practical incumbent in some areas of the district because she had represented it in the past. Yasmin Cornelius has the advantage of the fact that she's now been the district leader for months and attending meetings as the district leader and actually being able to say, I'm the incumbent district leader. So they both come with their own advantages, and this one's integral. This is the 70th. This is roughly from 8th Avenue to 5th Avenue, from the Park to 125th Street, Black Harlem, a little bit of White Harlem now, and but this is the base. So whoever comes out of this, and just to piggyback on what you said, what happens if you win this? Well, there's perception, so people say, wait, I'm going to support him. He's got some power. It's that kinetic energy. And then there's your potential energy, which is the fact that you take that apparatus and you turn it into your congressional campaign. Yeah. So this race is integral. Two very good candidates, and it's going to be a nail biter, I think.
Yeah, and this is interesting because this is, like you said, this is the heart. This is kind of where people, when they think about this district that was, represented by Adam Clayton Powell first, represented by Charles Rangel second, like they think about this area as kind of being the heart of it. So it's more symbolic than the actual numbers per se, because obviously now the district is spread out into the Bronx.
And on the male side, William Allen, who's the incumbent, now has a challenge from Vince Morgan, who's run as sort of an outsider candidate for Congress a few times. The funny thing is, William Allen was once the outsider. He had beaten Kevin Wardally, who was a Bill Lynch Harlem guy, and now he's the insider, so he's defending his turf. But Yasmin and William basically took a club that was, didn't have much left. It was in a bit of a shambles, and they've completely rebuilt it now, so they definitely have that ground game going in. Bill Perkins is a savvy vote-getter, so he has his own structure. So don't be surprised if on election day you actually see people on the streets working for these campaigns.
That's great. That's interesting.
The district, Michael, because I don't want to go on. By the way, that was a great example what you said in Brooklyn to explain what happens and the chaos that can happen if you don't have this basic structure done. That's a great example. In the district, perceived that the current, the way it's composed, the 13th congressional district, which is now Charlie Rangel is the Congress member, the portion of it, I'm still not clear. Is it 13%, 14%, 18% that goes into the Bronx? Because it's what you're indicating here is still a stronghold, and the power base is still in Central Harlem.
Right. I mean, Keith Wright talks a lot about how he has the Bronx Party endorsement. But
it's a very small portion.
It's a small portion. I believe that Charlie had it last time, and I don't think it necessarily helps you. Are they going to get people?
Why not?
Well, are they going to get people to hand flyers out for you, to get petitions, to stuff buildings, to work on election day? If I'm the black candidate in the Bronx, I work the churches, right? I find the people, I find my voters and try to turn them out. I don't depend on a county leader to magically produce votes. Now, remember, part of the district is also the Dominican and Puerto Rican. So this is, you don't just go up there and say, I'm Latino. Adam's going to have to go after some of the vote. Adriano, possibly Linares, if he jumps in, is going to have to go for some of the vote. The Cabrera district is it's Dominican, it's also, religious, so they're a little more conservative. So there's the complexity around that. It's a small portion of the district, but in a race that comes down to 2,500, 1,500 votes, it could be integral.
Isn't it a given that any black candidate worth his soul would actually use the faith-based, the churches as a spring? Most black candidates I know have a huge dependency on church.
Absolutely. I mean, if I'm running a campaign, that's my field plan up there. And I go back to Susan Johnson Cook again. She, that's her constituency. Now she's obviously way behind right now on prime Democratic voters, but that's the kind of thing she could segue into votes. We've seen how Cabrera has done it, and he's as a Latino candidate, he's very strong in the churches, and that's been his
Conservative.
base. Yeah.
Not as crazy as Ruben Diaz, but he's certainly conservative. By the way, he's half Puerto Rican. So he can play both fields there.
Right. He's certainly not. He's not a Tea Partier, and I think he's not Catholic, but in that sort of religious sense of social justice, he's progressive economically.
Definitely.
So
there was one other race we wanted to highlight was the 72nd AD. This is where Francesca Castellanos, Yuri Valdez, and Maria Murillo are competing. Let's break down that race for us, Michael, and whose candidate is who in this one.
Okay. So Robert Jackson and his crew, what they did was they split off from the Barack Obama Club, which is primarily Mark Levine's club, and by extension, Espaillat's club. They're sort of like a coalition now. They started their own club, and right now what you're seeing is Robert is running against Juan Rosa in the 71st. I think it's Part A. That's sort of seen as Denny's guy, which is interesting because it looks like Robert's going to win, and if Adriano loses and Robert says, I don't know if I want to go through this again, it's a tough district, and tacks and runs against the Denny Farrell, you can say, look, I beat your district leader handily, this is a direction I might want to go in. But say Adriano Espaillat is successful and Robert Jackson wins this race, and his candidate Judy Valdez versus Maria Murillo, she wins, now Maria Murillo's Espaillat's incumbent. Now they come into the Senate district. Now, I don't expect, knowing the history of Washington Heights, I don't expect the Dominican community to be disciplined enough to field one major candidate. So he has a big advantage. The interesting thing about Robert Jackson is he's an African-American candidate, but if you look at the 71st, it's primarily Latino, secondarily white, and thirdly African-American. So here's a guy he's a black guy, but his base is white people in Hudson Heights and Dominicans who are not with the Espaillat camp. So this is the sub-narrative to the congressional race. There's the congressional race, and then there's the Senate race, which is looming behind that. And whoever wins these races up here, that'll give them an advantage in either one of those theaters.
And we're going to see a lot of those ripple effects because, obviously, if Adriano Espaillat is elected to Congress, his seat becomes open in the state Senate. The primary for that will probably be 3 months before the Senate primary, based on the fact that I don't think Albany is going to get together and merge those primary dates. So they will see the congressional primary probably in June, followed by the Senate primary in September. So that would mean that seat would open up, or if Adriano doesn't run again, then the seat would still open up. And then, if you have assembly members jumping into that seat, Guillermo Linares is an example of an assembly member who might jump into that seat, then that assembly seat opens up as well. So you could see a lot of ripple effect in all these races.
Should Adriano, I hear people saying, Adriano's run twice. Adriano gets the same vote out of the 72nd AD in almost every race he runs.
Right,
he's a very legitimate candidate. And if you have 3 or 4 people from Harlem, 3 or 4 people from the Bronx, if Robert Rodriguez jumps in the 68th in East Harlem, and all of a sudden Adam's fighting in the 68th, he's got a pretty clear path. So I don't count him out. So there's a very good chance that that Senate seat will open up, and then Robert Jackson will come in as the favorite if he's successful in these smaller races.
Boy, that's a lot of ifs, but I got to tell you, because right now I'm not. No, you're right. You got to be able to, you know, sort of.
Right.
But one of the things, I'm not clear on who the final field of the candidates for the congressional for the 13th are going to be. No, we know Keith is in. We know that Adam Clayton Powell is in for sure, and you can see that by the numbers that they raise in funds. I haven't seen any filings for Adriano as legitimate a candidate he could be because of the two races, for two losses. But there's a split, as you suggested, in the Dominican community itself, which could be claimed as a base. And there's also, I'm not sure Bill Perkins is even in it fully, and I haven't seen any filings either. If you have, because I don't see any money there, and you're going to need money here, even though, you know, the money for the reasons you have. One, to scare off any potential challenges. If you have enough money, if you raise $500,000 or above that, you're a serious contender in a congressional district. Any light you can share on that?
Right. I mean, Adriano Espaillat, if you look at when he has an opponent in the 72nd, well, that's when he was an assemblyman, but you know, now he's a senator, but he would only garner about 65% of the vote. I mean, this division has been going on since Guillermo Linares, people forget, was the first American Dominican elected in the country. This has been going on for years. So I believe that Adriano's a legitimate candidate. I think that he's sort of waiting to get in, and I think that a lot is going to hedge on the fact that, you know, another legitimate Dominican candidate says, well, why don't I have a shot? You've gone twice. You know, this is my chance to jump into the fold, and if that happens, then he has his own problems. So you know, the funny thing about this race is the more candidates that come in, the less easy it is to call, because you're starting to divide every single neighborhood into many parts, and that's where it becomes difficult.
Definitely. Before we let you go, what are you gonna be watching for on the election night, the primary night in September when the district leaders race happens? How do you think it's gonna play out with your experience, kind of following these races, and where are you looking for maybe surprises to happen, I guess?
Yeah, I actually had a conversation with Bill Perkins last night, and I'll talk to him often. I saw him at an event, but you know, he definitely feels like he's in it. He feels like, you know, when he last ran, he had beaten Keith Wright 2-1 in his own assembly district, and he was only a councilman then, so he feels like he has a deeper connection to the people. That said, Keith has really stepped up his game. So, and you know, he's gotten out there a lot more than he had in the past. He did a lot of work around housing. So I think that 70th AD race, not to be redundant, is a big deal. I think it's hard to call. I'm calling Yasmin Cornelius in that one. Only because she's coming in as the incumbent. She's sort of almost an institution in Harlem, and she's still a young candidate. But I see that, you know, she is somebody that could, you know, really make a change. And also, Judy Valdez against Maria Murillo, an incumbent. You know, Robert Jackson's club right now, you know, they're new, and what they did was they took the volunteer, in full disclosure, I managed his Senate race. They took the volunteer base from that race, and they just quickly made it into a club. So they still have that energy. They're rolling with that energy. So I could see a potential upset in the 72nd in the female race as well.
Interesting. Well, we'll be taking a close eye on this, and then once the races happen, we see how the field develops a little bit. Maybe we'll bring you back and talk a little bit more about the race as we head into the congressional race next year. Michael Oliva, the political media consultant, joining us, and Harrison, thank you very much, guys.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Good.